cold slam of the trash bin lid echoed beside me as my own daughter pointed to the driveway and told me I belonged there. Still, I kept my fingers on that metal rim, feeling its chill instead of letting her see my hands shake. As the smell of old paper and dust rose, it mixed with every memory I'd tried too hard to forget. While that rusted lid vibrated in my grip, I finally understood what she thought I was worth. The same cold metal reminded me who had truly been thrown away. That's when I decided a man tossed out like garbage always returns, cleaner, sharper, and ready for justice. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The air inside Paul's old New Jersey home felt thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The fading wallpaper, the crooked family photos, the sagging couch, all of it seemed to lean inward, ready to collapse under the weight of one more argument. And today, that collapse felt inevitable. Paul stood in the living room, arms crossed, jaw tight, while Emily paced in front of him like a storm trapped inside four walls. Her voice was sharp, brittle, worn down from years of trying to get through to a man who refused to listen. "You're doing it again," she snapped, hands slicing the air. "Pretending everything is fine when it's not. Dad, you can't keep living like this. You're falling apart." Paul felt his chest rise defensively, as if her words were stones being hurled at him. "I said I'll handle it," he muttered. "I don't need anyone's help." "You do," Emily shouted. The word echoed, bouncing off the aging walls. "You're drowning, and you won't even grab the hand reaching out to pull you up." The frustration in her voice cut straight through him. He hated this, being cornered, being talked to like a broken man. His pride, once his anchor, now felt like a chain dragging him deeper into the dark. He stared at Emily, the little girl he once carried on his shoulders, now a grown woman glaring at him with eyes full of exhaustion and hurt. "Emily, enough," he said gruffly, turning away. "You're overreacting." That single dismissal, so familiar, so practiced, snapped something inside her. Her voice cracked as she yelled, "You know what? I'm done. I am done. If you don't want help, fine. Then you can get out right now." Paul froze. "What did you just say?" "Get out," she screamed, her face trembling with a rage so old it had roots. "If you refuse to act like a father, then you can't stay here like one. Your place—" Her chest heaved as she pointed toward the front door. "Your place is in the trash." The words sliced through him with more force than the anger she threw behind them. For a moment, his mind emptied. The house, the air, the room, all of it seemed to tilt, as though he were standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing to hold onto. He stared at her, stunned, trying to understand how they'd reached this point. How his daughter could say something like that. "Worthless," she added under her breath. "That's what it feels like trying to love you." Paul felt something inside him collapse quietly, like old timber finally giving way. But even through the shock, his pride flared up, instinctive and stubborn. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, voice low, tight. "You don't get to throw me out of my own home." "It hasn't been your home for a long time," she fired back. "Not since you stopped trying, not since you checked out of our lives." He swallowed, the words lodging in his throat. "I'll be fine on my own. I've always been fine on my own." "Yeah, keep telling yourself that," Emily snapped. "But if you don't leave, I swear I'm done. I'll cut you out completely." He opened his mouth to protest, but the sound of a door opening at the back of the house interrupted them. Corinne stepped inside, her face drawn with concern. Her hair was hastily tied back, as if she'd rushed over the moment she heard shouting. Even after the divorce, she was woven into their family's crises like a thread that refused to break. "What's going on?" she asked quietly, eyes shifting between father and daughter. Emily's breathing was heavy, her eyes glassy. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. I can't keep being the only one fixing things." Corinne looked at Paul, really looked. She saw the defensiveness, the fear, the shame he was trying so hard to hide. And she saw Emily's exhaustion, the years of resentment finally spilling out. She reached for Paul not physically but with her tone, gentle, steady, tired. "Paul," she said softly, "maybe it's time you step back, just for now. Let things cool down." He met her eyes and in them saw no judgment, just fatigue. The same fatigue he felt in his bones. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly, defeated. "Fine," he muttered. "If she wants me gone, I'll go." Emily turned away, pressing a hand to her face, shaking slightly. Corinne didn't move. Toward her, she simply stood still, her silence a fragile bridge between them all. Paul walked to his bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. He grabbed a small duffel bag, stuffing it clumsily with clothes, documents, whatever he could reach without thinking too hard. The house felt unfamiliar, almost hostile, as if rejecting him in the same breath Emily had. He paused in the doorway, looking back at the walls covered in memories, birthdays, holidays, graduations, moments he thought meant something. Maybe they did once. He stepped outside into the cold air. It stung his skin, but it also steadied him. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what came next. But he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Paul spent the first night after leaving his own home on a sagging pull-out couch in his old friend Mark's basement. The place smelled faintly of dust and motor oil, the scent of a life that wasn't his. Mark had offered the space without hesitation, but even that kindness felt like a spotlight on Paul's failure. He lay awake staring at the exposed pipes overhead, listening to the quiet hum of the water heater, trying to convince himself he hadn't hit rock bottom. But his chest told a different story, tight, aching, pressed down by humiliation he couldn't shake. Still, he refused to reach out to Emily. He refused to admit he might need help. A lifetime of self-reliance had calcified inside him. Asking for support felt like peeling skin from bone. Across town, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, replaying the argument again and again. At first, she told herself she'd made the right decision, that kicking her father out was the only way to break through his stubbornness. But as the hours turned to days, the certainty began to crumble. Her anger hadn't vanished. It still simmered under her skin, but guilt seeped in alongside it. She saw flashes of her father's stunned expression, the way his shoulders had sagged when she told him his place belonged in the trash. Those words haunted her more than she expected. Had she gone too far? Had she crossed a line she couldn't step back over? Jenna felt the tension stretching between them like a rope ready to snap. She called Paul first, her voice soft and hopeful. "Dad, can we talk?" But Paul, sitting at Mark's cluttered kitchen table with a mug of black coffee he couldn't bring himself to drink, shut her down before she could get past her second sentence. "I'm fine, Jenna. Don't worry about me." "You're not fine," she said gently. "This is serious." "I said I'm fine." His tone was firm, final. He didn't want pity. He didn't want company. He wanted space to reclaim whatever dignity he had left. When Jenna tried again, he cut the call short, insisting he didn't need anyone to fix his life. When her worried texts followed, he let the phone buzz unanswered beside him. Corinne wasn't as easy to brush off. She showed up at Mark's porch one afternoon, arms crossed over her chest, the look on her face a blend of frustration and sorrow. She'd always been able to read him too well. Paul knew before she even opened her mouth that she was here to break through the walls he'd rebuilt overnight. "Paul," she said softly, "this isn't the way to handle things." He leaned against the door frame, his jaw tightening. "Emily made her choice. I'm giving her what she wanted." Corinne shook her head. "She was angry. You were angry, but you're her father. You can't just walk away like this." "I didn't walk away," he snapped. "I was thrown out." "And now you're choosing to stay gone." Corinne's voice lowered. "You need to apologize, at least talk to her." But the idea of apologizing, of admitting he'd contributed to the mess, made something inside him stiffen. Pride, fear, habit, maybe all three. "I'm not crawling back," he muttered. "She said I was worthless. How am I supposed to answer that?" Corinne sighed, tired in a way that came from years of loving a man who struggled to love out loud. You could start by listening. That's all she's ever wanted." He couldn't respond. She left knowing she hadn't convinced him. Days passed in a blur of silence and avoidance. Paul tried to distract himself with errands, odd jobs, anything to keep busy. But emotions he'd buried for decades started surfacing, regret gnawing at him, shame creeping under his skin, loneliness growing louder in the quiet basement nights. Emily's words echoed in his head, merging with memories he'd tried to forget. Missed recitals, unreturned hugs, conversations he'd shut down before they'd even begun. He told himself back then that providing a roof and food was enough. Now, sitting alone with nothing but the hum of an old refrigerator, he wondered if he'd been fooling himself. Emily didn't fare much better. The house felt different without him, hollow in a way she couldn't admit out loud. After wrestling with her thoughts for too long, she called him. Once, twice, 5 times. Each call rang until it licked to voicemail. No texts came back. No acknowledgement. Her chest tightened with every unanswered ring until she finally placed the phone face down and whispered to herself, "Maybe he really is done with me." But the silence was louder than the anger had ever been. Meanwhile, Paul stood alone on Mark's back porch that evening, the cold air biting at his hands. He looked out at the dim yard and felt something shift inside him, a sense that the damage between him and Emily wasn't just from last night. It had been building for years. He'd been absent even when he was present, unreachable even when he was in the same room. For the first time, he wondered if Emily's explosion hadn't been about this week or this month, but a lifetime of feeling shut out. And the thought left him unsettled, realizing just how deeply the cracks ran, and how uncertain he was that he still had time to repair them. 3 days had passed since Paul left his own house, and each morning in Mark's cramped basement felt like waking up inside a reminder of everything he had lost. The thin mattress creaked every time he shifted, and the lonely tick of the wall clock grew louder with each hour. He kept telling himself he didn't need anyone, that he'd land on his feet like he always had. But the silence had begun to wear grooves into him, exposing thoughts he didn't want to face. Late that afternoon, while he was sorting through a stack of old job applications on the cluttered workbench, he heard footsteps coming down the wooden stairs. He expected Mark. Instead, Emily appeared in the dim light, her arms crossed tightly, her expression caught somewhere between anger and regret. Paul stiffened instantly, his pulse kicking up. This wasn't a visit he was prepared for. She stopped at the bottom step, taking in the basement as if trying to understand the reality of where her father had ended up. "Dad," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Paul swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here," he muttered. Emily drew in a breath, her voice trembling just a little. "I came to apologize for what I said. I shouldn't have said those things. They were cruel." She paused, her gaze flicking away before snapping back to him. "But I'm still angry. You keep shutting everyone out and I can't keep being the only one trying." Her words landed with a dull ache in his chest. He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred, incapable of holding onto anything the way they once did. "Emily, I know what I did. I know how I acted. But you think this is easy for me?" His voice cracked before he could steady it. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to be here, to feel like a failure?" Emily's posture softened, but her eyes stayed sharp, searching. "Dad, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I just want you to stop pretending everything is fine when it is." Paul felt something inside him bristle, defensiveness, shame, an old instinct to protect himself from anything that felt too close. "I didn't want to be a burden," he said, the words forced out. "I didn't want to drag you into my problems or anyone else. I don't know how to lean on people, not even my own family." Emily blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. For a moment she didn't speak, and the basement fell into a silence that wasn't hostile, just heavy with things neither of them had said for too long. Then she stepped closer, her voice quieter, gentler. "I get it more than you think. I've been holding on to things too, resentments, disappointments, feeling like you never saw me, never heard me. I guess I didn't know how to say it in a way that didn't come out angry. He frowned slightly, lifting his gaze. Emily. No, she said firmly, though tears rimmed her eyes. I need to say this, she exhaled shakily. Growing up, you were there physically but emotionally. Not really. You kept everything locked inside and it made me feel like I didn't matter, like I was always reaching for someone who wasn't reaching back. Paul felt the words hit him in the places he'd avoided for decades. Memories stirred, moments he'd brushed off, conversations he'd avoided, feelings he'd numbed out of fear or habit. He hadn't realized how much she'd been carrying, or how deep his absence had cut. I didn't know, he whispered. Or maybe I didn't want to know. I thought providing was enough. I never learned how to do the other part, the emotional part, and I'm sorry for that. Emily looked at him then, really looked, at the man behind the stubbornness and silence, the father she had tried so hard to understand. I never knew why you were so distant, she said softly. Maybe hearing it now helps. A little. The conversation wasn't clean or easy. It was jagged, raw, two people trying to navigate terrain neither had mapped before. But as they continued, the tension began to shift. Not disappearing, just loosening enough for both of them to breathe. Paul straightened, feeling exposed but unexpected. Idly lighter. I don't know how to fix everything overnight, he admitted. But I want to try, I want to be better, more open. You deserve that, even if it's hard for me. Emily studied him for a long moment, weighing his words. Actions, she said finally, will matter more than promises. I know. His voice was steady in a way he hadn't felt in years, but I mean it. She nodded slowly, as if allowing herself to believe him just a little. Then let's start small, one step at a time. Paul watched her, seeing not just the anger she carried, but the hurt beneath it, the hurt he'd helped shape. And for the first time in years, he felt something flicker inside him. Not pride, not defensiveness, but hope. Fragile, tentative, but real. As Emily turned toward the stairs, ready to leave him with his thoughts, Paul felt the weight of the future shift on his shoulders. No longer a burden, but a responsibility he couldn't afford to ignore. Because if he failed now, he knew he might lose her forever. Paul woke up the next morning with a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't confidence, far from it, but something quieter, steadier. A resolve that if he didn't push past his own walls now, he never would. The conversation with Emily had cracked something inside him, and rather than sealing it shut again, he forced himself to keep it open. So he started small. He called her. Not with long speeches, not with desperate apologies, just simple check-ins, the kind he'd never bothered with when she was younger. How's work? Did you make it home safe? Want to grab a coffee later in the week? He'd wait for her replies with a knot in his stomach, each answer from her feeling like proof he hadn't lost her entirely. They met a few times in public places, cafes, a quiet park bench, the corner booth of a little diner they used to go to when she was a kid. Paul tried every time to listen more than he spoke. He kept catching himself wanting to defend, justify, explain, but he bit back the impulses. For once, he wanted Emily to feel heard, not managed. She noticed the difference, though she didn't always acknowledge it. Sometimes she would stare at her coffee cup rather than meet his eyes, unsure how to bridge years of emotional distance in conversations lasting an hour or two. Emily appreciated the effort. She wasn't blind to it, but skepticism clung to her like a shadow. Every time she saw him leaning forward attentively, or texting her a reminder about something she'd mentioned in passing, a voice inside her whispered, "Don't get too comfortable. Don't let your guard down." She had spent so many years hardening herself against disappointment that softening again felt risky, even dangerous. Forgiveness was a door she wasn't ready to walk through yet. Not without proof, this wasn't just a temporary burst of effort. Jenna, meanwhile, played the reluctant peacemaker. She'd call Emily, urging patience. "He's trying, Em. You can see that, right?" And when Emily hesitated, Jenna would add gently, "People can change, even Dad." She wasn't naive. She knew their father's emotional armor had been forged over decades. but she'd also seen the shift in him, the vulnerability he was finally letting leak through the cracks. With Paul, Jenna was just as direct. She reminded him, kindly but firmly, that trust wasn't something he could earn back overnight. "Just keep showing up," she told him during one of their calls. "And don't expect her to just forget the past. This is going to take time." Her voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd grown up in the same emotional drought but learned to navigate it differently. Karen kept her distance, but she was there too, hovering on the periphery with quiet support. She offered advice when either of them needed it, careful not to take sides. When Paul confessed that the process felt painfully slow, she told him, "Slow isn't bad. Slow means you're doing it the right way." But she didn't insert herself into their reconciliation. She had learned long ago that forcing emotional closeness only pushed Paul further away. And gradually, tiny wins began to surface. Moments so small they could have been missed if either of them blinked. Paul remembered that Emily hated lemon in her tea. He ordered hers without it before she even asked. Emily laughed, really laughed, when he told a story from work, the kind of moment that caught her off guard and warmed the air between them. He noticed she'd been stressed and offered to drive her to an appointment when her car was in the shop. She accepted, hesitantly, but she accepted. Still, the tension didn't vanish. It lingered at the edge of every conversation, a reminder of the years they couldn't erase. Emily wondered sometimes if his efforts were rooted in guilt rather than genuine transformation. There were moments when she caught him zoning out or avoiding certain emotional topics, and the old frustration flared back up. Is he changing or just patching holes? He wondered late at night. She didn't want to fall back into the role of chasing a connection he wasn't fully committed to giving. Paul felt the weight of that hesitation. He could sense when she pulled back, saw it in her eyes when doubt returned. And instead of shutting down like he used to, he listened to that discomfort, forcing himself to sit with it. One evening, alone in the basement, he admitted something to himself he'd avoided for decades. Healing wasn't supposed to feel good. It wasn't supposed to be quick. It certainly wasn't supposed to be easy. He realized then that rebuilding a relationship was like learning a new language at 57, awkward, slow, humbling, but necessary, because the alternative was losing his daughter for good, and that, finally, was a loss he wasn't willing to accept. He took a long breath, feeling both the weight and the hope of the road ahead. And he knew, when he saw Emily next, he'd have to prove that commitment all over again. A full week had passed since Paul and Emily last spoke, and each day felt like walking on ground that hadn't fully settled. Paul kept trying, small calls, short texts, gentle check-ins. But Emily had been quiet, answering only briefly, keeping her distance while she sorted through her complicated feelings. Paul didn't push. He'd learned enough by now to understand that pressure only made her retreat. Then late one evening, as Paul sat on the edge of the pull-out couch in Mark's dim basement, his phone buzzed. Emily's name lit up the screen. He hesitated, breath held before answering. Her voice was soft, thinner than usual. "Dad, can we talk?" He straightened instinctively. "Yeah, I'm here." A long pause followed, the kind filled with things someone didn't quite know how to say. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for what I said. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I was angry, but the truth is, I was angry at a lot more than just what happened that night." Paul closed his eyes, letting the words settle. He'd been waiting for them, but hearing them still cracked something open inside him. Emily continued, voice trembling with regret. "I pushed you away because I've been carrying so much resentment. I convinced myself you didn't care, that you never would. And when I saw you slipping again, refusing help, it brought all that old hurt back. I lashed out. And I'm sorry." Paul rubbed a hand over his face, feeling a mix of relief and ache. "Emily, I appreciate that, I really do." His voice softened, lower than usual. "But I wasn't innocent in all this. I've made mistakes, big ones." She stayed silent, waiting. "I kept everything bottled up," he admitted. "My whole life, I avoided emotions like they were something dangerous. I didn't know how to talk to you or your sister in a way that made sense. I didn't know how to connect. And instead of learning, I hid behind work, behind responsibilities, behind silence. Emily swallowed audibly. Dad. He pushed forward before fear could clamp his throat shut. The truth is, I've always been scared. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of failing as a father. Scared of being vulnerable and having that used against me. He let out a hollow laugh. Especially with you. You've always been so strong, so independent. I felt like you didn't need me. And instead of stepping up, I stepped back. Those words hung between them like exposed wire. Dangerous, honest, crackling with emotion. Emily's breath hitched. I didn't know you felt that way. Her tone softened, melting into something wounded. I always thought it was the opposite, that you didn't care, that I was invisible. Paul's heart clenched. Invisible? Emily, no, I just didn't know how to show what I felt. She let out a fragile sound, halfway between a sigh and a sob. Growing up, I tried so hard to get your attention, to figure out how to make you proud, but you were always somewhere else. And when you finally did look at me, it was like you were seeing a stranger. Her honesty hit him harder than any argument they'd ever had. He could almost feel the years of silence pressing against both of them. I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you, Paul said quietly. But I see it now. I feel it now. And I'm sorry for every moment you felt alone because of me. Their breathing synced for a moment, slow, uneven, weighted with everything they were finally saying aloud. Emily wiped at her eyes on the other end of the line. I know we can't fix this overnight. I know I can't just forget the past. But hearing you say this, it helps, more than you think. A small seed of something warm bloomed in Paul's chest. Hope, cautious but real. From the doorway of the basement, Samantha appeared, having overheard enough from Paul's side of the conversation to understand what was happening. She didn't interrupt, just listened, relief softening her features. Paul caught her gaze and she nodded, encouraging him silently. You're doing good, she mouthed. Keep going. Emily sniffed hard. Maybe this is our first step, she said. Maybe we can try slowly, carefully. Paul nodded even though she couldn't see it. I'm not perfect, he said gently, but I'll do my best. You deserve that. She let out a trembling breath. I hope so, Dad. Their call didn't end with certainty, or promises, or declarations of a healed bond. It ended quietly, two people standing at the edges of a bridge they'd never tried to cross before. And as Paul lowered the phone, Samantha stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. You opened the door, she said softly. Now don't close it again. Paul looked toward the stairs, toward the world waiting above, and knew the hardest part was still ahead. The days that followed their first real apology took on a strange, tentative rhythm. Paul and Emily spoke more often, short phone calls, scattered texts, brief conversations that hovered somewhere between cautious hope and emotional hesitation. Their tone had softened from the sharp edges of weeks before, but there was still a guardedness to every exchange. Paul sensed it each time she paused before answering a question, each time her voice tightened when he asked about her day. Their communication wasn't strained anymore, but it wasn't free either. It felt like walking across a frozen pond, both of them afraid the ice might crack under too much weight. Despite the progress, unspoken tension sat between them, as real and solid as the distance that used to keep them apart. They had apologized explicitly, emotionally, but apologies couldn't erase years of hurt. Emily found herself studying his tone, searching for sincerity, wondering if this version of him would last. She didn't want temporary. She didn't want another cycle of emotional absence wrapped up in a week of effort. She needed consistency, and she wasn't convinced she'd get it. One afternoon, unable to hold the uncertainty in any longer, she called Jenna. I know he's trying, Emily said, pacing her kitchen with her lungs tight. I see it, but I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. What if this is just guilt? What if he goes back to shutting down once he feels better? Jenna, always the calmer one, didn't dismiss her fears. I get it, she said softly. You're scared of being disappointed again. It's more than that, Emily murmured. I need him to show up emotionally. Not for a week, not for a month, but for real, for good. Jenna hesitated before responding. People don't change overnight, but I think he wants to. I think this time is different. Emily stopped pacing. How can you be so sure? Because I've never heard him talk the way he did after you apologized, Jenna said. He's trying to understand you. That alone is new. Meanwhile, Paul was fighting his own quiet battle. Every conversation left him replaying his words afterward, wondering if he'd said the wrong thing, wondering if he had done enough. He could feel the scars he'd left on her, sharp reminders that one good conversation couldn't undo decades of emotional distance. He wanted to fix it desperately, but he didn't know how to show her that this time wasn't a performance. This time was a reckoning. Some nights he lay awake staring at the shadows on the basement ceiling, thinking of all the birthdays he'd rushed through, the school projects he hadn't helped with, the moments he stayed silent when she needed him most. He didn't want apologies to become his only tool. He needed action, something consistent, something steady that could speak for him when words felt too thin. So Paul started small. He invited Emily out for coffee, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to know how her week had gone. He asked about our job, about her upcoming plans, about things he once dismissed with a nod or a distracted "that's nice." When she talked, he listened, really listened. He noticed how her eyes lit up when she spoke about a recent project at work. He remembered to ask about the coworker she'd complained about last month. He even suggested they visit a local art fair she mentioned once in passing, something he never would have picked up on before. Emily noticed. She didn't say anything, not out loud, but the edges of her responses softened. She didn't hold her breath waiting for him to shut down anymore. Still, she wasn't ready to fall into comfortable trust. Not yet. Every step forward felt like a test she wasn't sure he would pass. Samantha and Jenna watched from the sidelines, quietly relieved. They saw the small changes, Paul pausing before speaking, Emily choosing not to pull away, both of them trying even through the awkwardness. Just give it time, Samantha gently reminded them whenever doubts surfaced. Healing isn't supposed to feel easy. It's supposed to feel earned. One evening, after a particularly thoughtful conversation with Emily, Paul sat alone on the edge of the basement bed. He replayed her voice in his head, the hesitation, the hope, the hurt still lingering underneath. And for the first time in years, he wanted to say something without fearing it would come out wrong. He picked up his phone and typed slowly, carefully, each word chosen as if it carried the weight of their entire history. I know I can't undo the past, but I'll try every day to be better. I hope you'll give me the chance. He stared at the message for a long moment before hitting send. Emily saw the text just as she was settling into bed. Her breath caught, her chest tightening. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even the full apology he might have offered face to face. But it was real. And it left her wondering, quietly, cautiously, whether this time they might actually find their way forward. The small corner of the cafe was quiet, warmed by the soft glow of hanging lights and the faint hum of conversations drifting from other tables. Paul and Emily sat across from each other, 2 mugs of untouched tea sending up thin ribbons of steam. For once, neither of them felt pressured to fill the silence. They had chosen this little spot because it was familiar, somewhere Emily used to drag him after school when she was a teenager, hoping for a moment of closeness he rarely offered. Back then, the silence between them felt heavy, almost suffocating. Today, surprisingly, it felt different. Paul leaned back slightly, studying Emily in the gentle glow. She wasn't stiff. She wasn't guarded. She was just there, present. And he realized he couldn't remember the last time they'd shared a moment like this without tension choking it. Emily slowly stirred her tea, watching the swirl of color blend into the water. She wasn't sure what to expect when she agreed to meet him tonight. She had prepared herself for awkwardness, maybe even frustration. But instead, she found a kind of peace settling around them, a quiet she hadn't felt since she was little, when silence meant safety and presence, not distance. "It's nice," she finally said quietly, almost surprised at her own words. "Just sitting here." Paul nodded. "Yeah, it is." He hesitated, his fingers tapping lightly against his mug. "Feels like a long time since we've been able to just sit." Emily let out a soft breath. She didn't look directly at him, but she didn't pull away either. "It doesn't feel empty anymore," she admitted. "I used to hate the silence with you. It made me feel like there was something wrong with me, or with us." Paul felt the confession settle inside him, deep and heavy. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure how to answer. But Emily wasn't done. "I didn't know how to handle it," she continued. "The quiet made me feel like I was always trying to earn something you weren't giving." Paul clasped his hands together, his jaw tightening with shame. For years, he had hidden behind silence, believing it was safer than saying the wrong thing. Now, seeing how it had shaped her, the avoidance felt cowardly. "I never meant for you to feel that way," he said finally, voice low. "Truth is, I didn't know how to talk. Not about feelings, not about anything real. I was scared if I opened up I'd say the wrong thing, or," he hesitated, the old fear tugging at him, "or that you'd see something in me I didn't want anyone to see. Weakness, fear, failure." Emily looked up then, meeting his eyes with a softness he wasn't expecting. "I wasn't looking for perfection, Dad. I just wanted you." Her voice cracked slightly, and Paul felt something inside him fracture. Not painfully, just truthfully. He exhaled a long, unsteady breath. "I know, and I'm sorry for all the years I kept you at arm's length. I was proud, too proud, and it cost us." Emily's fingers tightened around her mug. "Sometimes I woe and dared if I mattered to you at all." "You did," he said immediately. "You always did. I just didn't know how to show it." They both let the words linger, as if giving them room to breathe. At the counter, Samantha watched discreetly from a distance. She had insisted on accompanying them but respected their space, choosing a seat far enough away to let them talk. She saw the softening in Emily's shoulders, the openness in Paul's expression, and it filled her with cautious hope. After weeks, years of tension, this quiet closeness felt like a miracle. When Paul glanced her way, she offered a small nod, telling him silently to keep going, to stay open. A little while later, Jenna arrived, sliding into the cafe with her usual gentle presence. She approached their table, careful not to interrupt, but Emily waved her over with a small smile. Jenna took one look at the two of them, their relaxed posture, the bare vulnerability in the air, and raised her brows approvingly. "You two look good," she said softly. Emily gave a half shrug. "We're trying." Paul chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, trying." Jenna sat with them a moment, observing without pressing. "It's a start," she finally said. "A real one, keep at it." After Jenna stepped away to order her drink, Paul and Emily fell back into silence. But this time, it felt even more grounded, more intentional, as if both of them understood that words weren't always needed for healing. Sometimes, simply choosing to stay was enough. Emily looked at her father, her expression contemplative. "We still have a long way to go," she said quietly. "I know," Paul replied. "I'm ready for it, however long it takes." She nodded, taking in the sincerity of his tone. Even with everything unresolved, the past, the wounds, the doubts, something had shifted tonight. Something fragile but real. A small step, a quiet step, but a step forward nonetheless. And as they sat in the soft cafe light, neither of them moved to break the silence. They didn't need to. For the first time in years, the silence itself was healing. Paul rehearsed the invitation 3 times before finally picking up his phone. Even then, when Emily answered, his voice wavered. He asked her carefully, almost cautiously, if she'd come over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a small family meal. The silence on her end stretched long enough that he wondered if she'd say no, but eventually she agreed. Quietly, hesitantly, but she agreed. And for Paul, that alone felt like a step worth holding onto. He spent the afternoon preparing Mark's small kitchen, wiping down counters, setting the table with mismatched plates, and trying to make the place feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a home, at least for one evening. Corinne arrived first, offering a gentle smile as she placed a store-bought casserole on the counter. Her presence, though still tinged with distance, brought a sense of grounding. Jenna came next, bustling in with her usual energy, carrying a bag of salad and an eagerness to bridge whatever gaps still lingered. When Emily finally walked in, Paul felt a knot tighten and loosen in his chest all at once. She looked unsure, standing at the doorway with her coat half unbuttoned, scanning the room as if bracing for something to go wrong. Paul stepped forward, a small, hopeful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. She nodded, offering a faint smile in return. "Thanks for inviting me." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was something in between, something real. As they all sat down, the awkwardness settled almost immediately. Conversations started and stopped abruptly, like engines sputtering in winter. Paul asked how work was. Emily answered in short, polite responses. Corinne made a comment about the weather. Jenna tried to laugh. The quiet that followed felt thick and slightly uncomfortable. Paul felt himself slipping into old habits, silence, retreat, the urge to fold inward, but he forced himself to stay present. He caught Emily's eyes briefly, offering a gentle look that said, "I'm trying." She looked away, but her expression softened just slightly. It was Jenna who eventually eased the tension. She leaned forward with a grin that felt just mischievous enough to work. "Hey, Emily," she said, "remember when Dad tried to make pancakes when we were kids and we ended up eating scrambled batter?" Emily actually laughed genuinely, unexpectedly. "Oh my God, yes. He put in salt instead of sugar." Paul raised his hands defensively. "In my defense, the containers looked exactly the same." Jenna shook her head. "Mom labeled them." Even Corinne cracked a smile, her shoulders relaxing. "He never checked labels," she teased lightly. "Still doesn't." Paul felt the embarrassment warm his cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a failure. It felt like participation, like being part of something instead of being on the outside looking in. The story opened a door, slowly. Emily began sharing pieces of her life again, her coworkers, a project she was leading, a funny mishap that happened at the office. Paul listened with an attentiveness that surprised her. His eyes didn't drift away. He didn't look bored or distracted. Every time she paused, he nodded, prompting her to continue. He remembered the name of the coworker she mentioned last week. He laughed at the right moments. He even asked a thoughtful question about her project, one that showed he had been paying attention to her earlier messages. Emily noticed, and for the first time that night, she let her guard down just a little. Corinne watched the exchange from across the table, something soft settling in her expression. She knew how fragile this rebuilding process was, but she also knew how much they needed this moment. She didn't interfere, just offered supportive glances, subtle encouragement. The atmosphere continued to ease. Conversation flowed a little more naturally. Laughter slipped in. Even the pauses became comfortable instead of weighted. The tension that had shadowed them for weeks began to dissolve, bit by bit, like frost melting in warm air. Toward the end of the meal, when everyone was finishing dessert, store-bought brownies Jenna insisted were gourmet. Paul turned to Emily. His voice was low, steady, carrying something he had never allowed himself to say aloud. "Emily," he began, and she glanced at him curiously, cautious but open. "I need you to know something." He swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "I'm proud of the woman you've become." The table went still. Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching. She blinked, absorbing the words that had been missing from her entire adulthood. Words she had once stopped hoping to hear. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. A quiet, trembling exhale escaped her, and she nodded, slowly, deliberately, as emotion tightened her throat. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a full mending of the past, but it was acknowledgement, validation, a seed of something new. As the night wrapped up, coats zipped and dishes cleared, Emily paused at the doorway before leaving. She didn't say much, just met Paul's eyes and offered a small, careful nod, a silent promise that despite her hesitation, she wasn't giving up. Paul watched her go, the echo of her quiet nod lingering in the room. Maybe things weren't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, they were finally moving in the right direction. Progress came in uneven waves, never in straight lines. Some days, Paul and Emily found themselves talking with an ease that felt almost natural, small conversations, small laughs, small openings. Other days, it felt like they were standing on opposite ends of a bridge they were still learning how to build. Their emotional walls didn't disappear just because they wanted them to. They lingered, sometimes invisible, sometimes towering, shaping the tone of every conversation. Paul still stumbled over his words, cautious not to say something that might upset her. Emily still carried decades of unresolved pain that bubbled up when she least expected it. They were trying, yes, but the distance between them still pulsed like a bruise that hadn't fully healed. One afternoon, their fragile rhythm cracked without warning. They were sitting in a quiet cafe, the same one where they had shared their first comfortable silence weeks earlier. The conversation had been easy enough: work, Jenna's new recipe disaster, Samantha's recent good news, until Paul, trying to be honest, brought up one of the topics they had avoided carefully until now. "I know I failed you, Em," he said gently. "As a father, I should have been there more, I should have." Emily stiffened instantly. Her jaw tightened, her eyes dropping to her coffee. "Dad, can we not do this right now?" Paul blinked, thrown off. He hadn't meant to provoke anything. "I'm just saying I know how much I messed up." "Right," she snapped, heat rising in her voice. "Because it's always about what you didn't do, not how it felt for me, not how I had to make peace with being ignored." Paul's chest tightened. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," she said, pushing back from the table. "You start apologizing and then you expect me to pat you on the back for it, like that fixes years of damage." His heart dropped. "That's not what I meant." "Sure," she muttered, grabbing her bag. "Let's just end it here today, before we say something stupid." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him sitting alone in the same silence that used to comfort them both, now sharp and cold once again. Later that night, Paul found himself staring at the ceiling of the basement, the familiar ache of regret tightening around him. He had tried to talk about the past, to take responsibility, but he had unintentionally reopened wounds instead of offering healing. He replayed the conversation, realizing too late how his words might have landed. Her hurt, he could feel her anger, and he knew deeply, painfully, that she wasn't wrong. He picked up his phone, exhaled slowly, and dialed her number. Emily answered on the second ring, her tone guarded. "Yeah." Paul swallowed hard. "Emily, I'm sorry." Silence hovered before she responded. "For what?" "For bringing things up the way I did, for not thinking about how it would make you feel." He paused, letting the sincerity anchor every word. "I wasn't trying to make it about me. I just wanted to acknowledge what I should have been better at. I know I hurt you. I know you didn't deserve to grow up feeling invisible. I'm sorry for every time I made you feel that way." Emily didn't answer right away. He could hear her breathing softly on the other end. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with a mixture of frustration and understanding. "I'm still angry," she admitted. "Not just at today, at everything. But I know you're trying. That's the part that's confusing, because for so long you didn't." "I know," Paul whispered, "and I should have tried sooner." She sighed. "My anger, it's not because I hate you. It's because I spent so long wanting something from you that you didn't know how to give." He closed his eyes, the truth of her words cutting through him. "I want to give it now," he said quietly. "Whatever I can, even if I'm learning as I go." Another pause, long but softer this time. "Okay," she finally said. Then we'll work on it together, but don't expect it to magically disappear." "I won't," he promised. The next day, Jenna stopped by Paul's place on her way home. She had heard bits of what happened from Emily and didn't hesitate to jump into her unofficial role as mediator. "This is normal," she told them both separately. "Setbacks happen. What matters is that you both came back to the table. You didn't shut down. That's progress." And she was right. Healing wasn't neat or predictable. It was messy, uncomfortable, filled with stops and restarts. Paul and Emily both struggled with letting go of their resentment, his guilt, her hurt, the years of silence between them. But neither ran from it. Not this time. When they finally talked again later that week, calmer, quieter, there was a new understanding in their voices. Not complete forgiveness, not perfect clarity, but acknowledgement, mutual recognition of the damage, and the desire to move forward despite it. They weren't healed, but for the first time, they were choosing the road ahead together, even knowing how difficult it would be. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm, gentle, cautious, but unmistakably different from anything Paul and Emily had known before. Their conversations no longer revolved around old wounds or rehashed arguments. Instead, they slowly shifted toward what tomorrow might look like. It wasn't a dramatic change. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was subtle, like the gradual warming of the air before spring announces itself. Sometimes during their calls, Paul caught himself talking about future plans, helping Emily repaint her living room, attending Jenna's community event, even hosting another family dinner once he found a more stable place to stay. Emily didn't shut down the ideas. She didn't question whether he was capable of following through. Instead, she listened, responded, added her own thoughts. It was small, but it was new. It felt like possibility. The family dynamic shifted as well, almost quietly, as if the household itself exhaled after years of tension. Karen still kept a respectful emotional distance from Paul, but she no longer braced herself when he stepped into a room. Jenna became less of a referee and more of a supporter, cheering on the small victories she saw unfolding, an easy laugh between father and daughter, a shared joke, a comfortable pause. Samantha watched the changes with cautious relief, her eyes softening each time she saw Paul choose vulnerability over silence. During Sunday dinners, something they had tentatively reinstated, there was a sense of unity that hadn't existed in years. People lingered at the table longer, voices blended instead of clashing. Even the quiet moments felt settled instead of strained. The bond wasn't perfect. It still wobbled under the weight of their history. But now, when cracks appeared, someone stepped forward to patch them instead of pretending they weren't there. For Emily, this shift stirred something deeper. She had spent so much of her life carrying anger like armor, anger that protected her, anger that shaped her, anger that convinced her she didn't need anyone. But as she continued talking with Paul, as she saw the effort he made to show up emotionally, she began to understand the cost of holding onto that resentment. It had not only pushed him away, it had weighed her down, too. One night she sat on her bed scrolling through old pictures, ones she'd tucked away years ago because the memories felt too painful or too incomplete. And for the first time, she didn't see the child longing for validation. She saw a girl doing her best with what she knew. She saw a father who, even in his distance, hadn't stopped caring. He just didn't know how to express it. Slowly, quietly, Emily forgave herself for carrying so much hurt, forgave herself for not knowing how to let go sooner. And in that forgiveness, something inside her softened. Meanwhile, Paul found himself undergoing a transformation he never expected at 57. Every effort he made, every phone call, every apology, every moment he chose honesty over retreat, chipped away at the pride he had spent his whole life guarding. He learned that vulnerability didn't make him weak. It made him human. It made him a father. Some nights when he journaled, a habit Samantha encouraged him to start, he realized that love wasn't about providing or protecting with perfect strength. It was about showing up even when you felt unsure. It was about offering pieces of your heart instead of hiding behind your scars. He carried that realization into every interaction with Emily. He didn't try to fix things quickly. He didn't overcompensate. He simply remained present, even when conversations were awkward, even when emotions ran high, even when silence stretched too long. For the first time in his life, he showed up without armor. The final moment of healing came unexpectedly, at a family gathering in Jenna's backyard. The evening was warm, the string lights flickering softly overhead, while laughter drifted from small conversations happening around the yard. Paul stood near the fence, watching the others with an expression full of quiet gratitude. Emily approached him with 2 glasses of lemonade, handing him one without fuss. They stood side by side, not talking, not analyzing, just breathing in the gentle sounds around them. When Paul turned to look at her, she met his gaze with something clear and steady. There were no tears, no speeches, no dramatic revelations, just a shared understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of how far they'd come and how far they still intended to go. It was the kind of moment that didn't need words. It spoke on its own. From across the yard, Samantha watched them, her chest swelling with relief. She had witnessed every fracture and every slow mending, every step forward and every cautious retreat. Seeing them now, standing together, connected without force or fear, felt like witnessing the quiet victory she'd been praying for. She hoped deeply and sincerely that this time the healing would last. As the night drew to a close, the family gathered for a group photo, something they hadn't done in years. Paul stood next to Emily, a gentle smile warming his face as she leaned in just slightly, allowing their shoulders to touch. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. A new beginning, not defined by perfection or promises, but by small, meaningful moments that whispered, "We're trying. We're healing. We're becoming a family again." For weeks, Paul had felt something tightening around him again, an old familiar pressure, like a shadow he thought he'd already outrun. Bills were piling up faster than he could manage, and the company he worked for had been hinting at downsizing. He tried to convince himself it was temporary, that he just needed time to get back on his feet. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was standing at the edge of losing his job, and the fear of slipping backward gnawed at him harder with every passing day. One morning, after a tense meeting with his supervisor that offered more uncertainty than answers, Paul found himself sitting in his car, staring blankly at the dashboard. His hands trembled slightly. The progress he'd made with Emily suddenly felt fragile, like one wrong move could shatter everything. He imagined telling her he was struggling again, that he might lose his job, that he didn't know what to do next. Shame rose in him like a wave. Pride, too. That old instinct to isolate, to retreat into silence where no one could judge him. But this time, he caught himself. He remembered all the conversations he and Emily had shared, the tentative laughter, the honest confessions, the fragile trust they were rebuilding. If he shut down now, if he disappeared into the same old patterns, he knew he'd lose more than his job. He'd lose her trust. That thought alone made him inhale slowly and pull out his phone. "Emily," he said when she answered, his voice more strained than he intended, "can we talk?" Emily heard the tightness instantly. "Yeah, what's going on?" Later that evening, sitting across from her in her living room, Paul forced himself to speak. "I might lose my job," he admitted. "Things at work aren't looking good." Emily froze. For a moment she felt that familiar rush of frustration, sharp, hot, immediate. Why now, she thought. They had worked so hard to move forward, and hearing this felt like the universe tugging them backward. She opened her mouth, ready to lecture high. For not telling her sooner, for carrying this alone. But then she saw the fear in his eyes. Real fear, not the defensive stubbornness she had grown up with. She exhaled slowly instead. "Dad, why didn't you say anything earlier?" "I didn't want to be a burden," he murmured. "I didn't want you thinking I was slipping again." Emily closed her eyes briefly, understanding more than she wanted to admit. Old habits didn't vanish overnight. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," she said softly, "but you can't shut me out every time things get hard." He nodded ashamed. I know. There was another long pause between them. Then Emily straightened, her tone shifting from emotional daughter to determined partner. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to sit down and look at everything, your bills, your options, what you're eligible for, what we can plan together. Not me fixing it for you. Together. This is a partnership, not charity. Paul's first instinct was to refuse. His chest tightened, the resistance forming almost automatically. Emily, I don't want you paying my bills or… I didn't say I would fix everything, she interrupted firmly. I said we would make a plan, together. You're not alone in this unless you choose to be. He looked down, struggling against the old reflex to pull away. He'd spent a lifetime believing that needing help made him weak. Accepting support from his daughter felt like admitting failure in some deep, private part of him. Dad, Emily said gently, you can't keep carrying everything alone, not anymore. He swallowed hard. I don't want you to feel responsible for me. I already spent most of my life feeling responsible for your emotional distance, she said quietly. This is different. This is us actually working through something together. Her honesty disarmed him. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. I'm afraid, he admitted. Afraid of depending on you, afraid you'll see me as weak. Emily's expression softened. And I'm afraid, she whispered, of always having to be the strong one, of being the only one holding this together. Their eyes met, raw, honest, vulnerable. Another silence settled, but this one felt different, not distant, not cold, just real. Finally, Paul exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders like a slow release of pressure. Okay, he said, let's do it your way, together. Emily nodded, together. It wasn't a grand moment. There were no dramatic declarations or tears, just two people acknowledging a shift in their relationship, one where trust didn't flow only one way anymore, but both directions. As Paul stood to leave later that night, he glanced back at Emily, seeing the quiet determination on her face, the same determination he used to miss when she was younger. And for the first time, he didn't see himself as a burden. He saw himself as part of a team. Their team. And though the future was still uncertain, he felt something unfamiliar settle in him. Not fear, not shame. Hope. The shift in their relationship didn't happen overnight, but day by day, layer by layer, something inside Paul and Emily began to rearrange itself. Their conversations, once guarded and careful, started to open in ways neither had expected. Paul found himself speaking about things he had buried for decades. Not big dramatic confessions, but small truths that had shaped him. How he'd grown up in a house where emotions were met with silence, where vulnerability was treated like a flaw. How he'd learned early on to keep his guard up, because letting it down always seemed to end with someone getting hurt. One evening they sat on a park bench near the community center, the cool air brushing against them as Paul talked. Emily listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't interrupt. For once, she didn't have to push him to talk. He offered the pieces willingly. I wasn't trying to push you away, he said, staring ahead at the darkening sky. I just didn't know how to show anything. I thought if I said the wrong thing, I'd mess everything up even more. Emily looked down at her shoes, her voice soft when she replied. I always thought it meant you didn't care, that I didn't matter enough. Paul's chest tightened. You mattered more than you know, I just didn't know how to say it or act like it. Emily's breath trembled as she finally let the words slip out, words she had held back for years. Growing up, your silence made me feel unworthy of love, like there was something wrong with me, like I had to earn every little bit of your attention. Paul turned toward her then, really seeing the pain she had carried. Emily, I'm sorry, he whispered. I never wanted you to feel that way. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the past sat between them, but it didn't choke them the way it used to. Instead, it felt like something they were finally learning to set down. Over the next few weeks, their emotional intimacy deepened. It wasn't flawless. There were still days when Paul hesitated to open up or when Emily felt the old resentment tug at her heart. But they were trusting each other more, stepping toward the conversations they once avoided. Emily began sharing her insecurities, the way she often overcompensated in relationships because she feared not being enough. Paul admitted how hard it was to unlearn old habits, how every time he tried to express emotion, something inside him fought to retreat. Samantha noticed the changes like someone watching winter melt into spring, slowly at first, then undeniably. She'd catch glimpses of them laughing softly during dinner, or see Paul listening with genuine focus when Emily spoke. Each moment brought her a quiet sense of relief, like a knot loosening inside her chest. She didn't interfere, didn't push them. She simply observed, grateful that after years of disconnection, the emotional walls were finally starting to crumble. The first real test of their new dynamic came one Saturday afternoon when they decided to tackle a small project together, organizing the storage shed behind Mark's house. It was mundane, tedious work, the kind of thing that once would have sparked tension. But this time, something was different. Paul handed tools to Emily without snapping. Emily offered suggestions without sounding like she was criticizing. They worked side by side, dusting off boxes, sorting old items, making decisions without arguing. Sweat trickled down their foreheads and their clothes were smudged with dirt, but neither complained. There was a strange sense of ease between them, an almost forgotten rhythm of teamwork. At one point, Emily laughed when a stack of old paint cans nearly collapsed on Paul's feet. He laughed too, genuinely, and the sound didn't feel foreign. It felt earned. By the time they finished, the shed looked organized for the first time in years. They sat on two old lawn chairs outside, catching their breath as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. "This is the first time we've done something like this without fighting," Emily said with a small smile. Paul chuckled. "Yeah, guess we're learning." She turned slightly, studying him with a seriousness that softened with emotion. This is the kind of father-daughter relationship I always wanted." Paul felt the words hit him with quiet force. He didn't rush to respond. He took a breath, letting the moment settle in his chest. "I know I can't change the past," he said softly, "but I can be better now, and I want to be. I'll keep working on this, on being open, on showing up, not when it's convenient, but whenever you need me." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "That's all I ever wanted." The sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over them as they sat together in peaceful silence. For the first time in years, that silence wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. For weeks, Paul had been doing better, more open, more present, more communicative than he had been in decades. But all it took was one brutal day at work to send him spiraling back into the shadows he thought he'd left behind. His supervisor had implied layoffs were coming again, hinting that Paul's department might be first on the chopping block. The moment the conversation ended, old fears wrapped around him like cold chains. Fear of failure, fear of burdening Emily again, fear of disappointing everyone who'd finally started believing in him. By the time he got home to Mark's basement that evening, Paul's chest felt tight, his thoughts heavy and spiraling. He didn't answer Emily's text, then he ignored her call. He told himself he needed one night, just one, to get himself under control. But one night turned into two, then three, and soon he found himself slipping back into silence, isolating exactly the way he used to. He knew the pattern, he recognized it, but he couldn't seem to stop it. Emily noticed almost immediately. The shift was subtle at first, a shorter reply, a missed call, but she felt it like a familiar ache. She had lived through years of that emotional distance. She knew the signs better than anyone. And with each unanswered message, frustration rose in her chest like a tightening knot. One evening, unable to hold it in anymore, she drove to Mark's house and knocked on the basement door with more force than she intended. When Paul finally opened it, his expression startled. Emily stepped inside before he could say anything. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Why are you pulling away again?" Paul stiffened, caught off guard. I'm not pulling away, I've just been busy. Don't do that, she said sharply. Don't pretend I'm imagining it. You've barely spoken to me in days. He opened his mouth, but no explanation came out, just a defensive huff of air. That alone made Emily's frustration flare. I thought we were past this, she said, her voice trembling with hurt. I thought things were changing, but you keep pushing me away every time something gets difficult. That's not fair, he shot back, the old defensiveness rising. I've been trying, I'm doing the best I can. I'm not asking for perfection, she snapped. I'm asking you to talk to me, to let me in. Isn't that what we've been working toward? Paul looked away, jaw clenched, shoulders tight. You don't understand, I don't always have the words. And you think I do, Emily fired back. Dad, I'm trying too, but every time you disappear emotionally, it makes me feel like I never mattered to you, like nothing's actually changed. Her voice wavered, but she kept her eyes on him, refusing to back down. The tension between them thickened, years of old wounds resurfacing in the charged air. Paul ran a hand through his hair, pacing in frustration. I don't know why you expect me to suddenly be someone I've never been. I'm trying. Emily cut him off. Then why hide? Why go silent? Why make me feel like I'm right back in the past? The question hit him harder than he expected. He froze, shoulders slumping as the fight slowly drained from him. Emily watched him, waiting, pushing him silently to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. Finally, Paul sank into the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. Because I'm scared, he said. I'm scared of needing you. I'm scared of relying on anyone. Every time I start to open up, I feel like I'm losing control, and losing control terrifies me. Emily blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. He continued, voice cracking with vulnerability he rarely allowed. I've spent my whole life keeping everything inside. It felt safer that way. When something stressful happens, my instinct is to shut down, to pull away before I can disappoint anyone. He looked up at her then, eyes tired, defeated. It's not because I don't care. It's because I don't know how to do this without feeling like I'm going to fall apart. Emily felt her anger soften, replaced by something quieter, empathy. She stepped closer, sitting down beside him. I'm not asking you to be perfect, she said again, gently this time. I'm asking you to try with me, to tell me when you're scared instead of disappearing. Before Paul could respond, a soft knock came from upstairs. Corinne appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face. She'd overheard just enough to understand the tension. Paul, she said softly, you don't have to hide from the people who love you. Opening up doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Her words were steady, gentle, firm in a way only someone who had known him for decades could manage. Paul met her gaze, seeing not judgment but encouragement, understanding, a push toward the man he wanted to become. Left alone with Emily again, Paul drew in a slow, shaky breath. You're right, he said. Both of you, I can't keep running from this. Emily nodded, relief softening her shoulders. Then don't. He looked into his daughter's eyes, really looked, and made a choice he'd avoided his entire life. I'm going to do better, he whispered. I promise, no more disappearing, no more shutting you out. And Emily, though still cautious, believed him enough to stay seated beside him. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't a neat resolution. But it was real. And for Paul, it was the beginning of choosing vulnerability on purpose. The morning after the confrontation, Paul woke before sunrise, the restless ache of the previous night still heavy in his chest. He sat on the edge of the bed in Mark's dim basement, staring at the faint outline of his shoes on the floor. The silence wasn't comforting, it was accusing. Every excuse he'd hidden behind for years now felt flimsy, childish. He replayed Emily's words, her hurt, her frustration, and finally her plea. Then don't. For the first time in his life, he didn't run from that discomfort. He stayed with it. let it strip away the stubbornness he had clung to like armor, and something inside him shifted, quietly but unmistakably. He realized he couldn't keep living shadowed by fear. If he wanted his daughter back, really back, he had to be someone different, someone brave enough to face his own heart. Later that afternoon, hands trembling slightly, he drove to Emily's house. He didn't text ahead. He didn't rehearse lines. He simply knocked and hoped the courage he felt wouldn't evaporate the moment she opened the door. When she did, her expression flickered between surprise and caution. "Dad." Paul swallowed. "Can we talk?" Emily stepped aside, letting him in, though her uncertainty was palpable. They sat in the living room, sunlight cutting across the floor between them. Paul felt exposed, as if the light itself was demanding truth. He drew a shaky breath. "Emily, I owe you more than an apology." She blinked, bracing herself. "For most of my life," he continued, voice thick, "I've been scared, scared of letting people in, scared of needing anyone, scared that if I opened up I'd lose control or get hurt." He paused, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "And I let that fear run my life. I let it run our relationship, and you paid the price for that." Emily wasn't expecting that. Her eyes widened, her breath hitching softly. She had anticipated excuses or deflection, something familiar. She had not expected vulnerability, not like this. Paul continued, his voice trembling with honesty he could no longer hide behind. "I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to keep pushing you away every time I'm scared. I'm tired of being afraid, and I'm ready to face it, all of it, even when it's hard." Emily's chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with something tender and aching. She had waited so many years to hear something like this. "Dad, I didn't know you could even say something like that," she admitted softly. "I didn't know you saw it." "I see it now," he said. "I see you. I see what my silence did to you, and I want in. Oh, I need to do better." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, but the air between them felt different, warmer, clearer, like a barrier had finally cracked open. From that moment forward, their approach shifted. Conversations weren't tiptoed around anymore. When Paul felt overwhelmed, he said so instead of disappearing. When Emily felt triggered by old patterns, she spoke up instead of shutting down. They didn't always get it right, but they tried, and trying for the first time felt enough. A week later, the family gathered at Jenna's place for a small dinner. Normally, Paul would have stayed quiet, content to blend into the background and let the others talk. But tonight was different. As the meal went on, he stood up, hands trembling slightly, and cleared his throat. I want to say something," he said. The table fell silent. "I've been working on myself, trying to open up more. And it's been hard, but Emily's been patient with me, and I'm grateful. I haven't said that before." Emily stared at him, stunned but moved. Paul continued, voice cracking, "I'm not perfect, but I'm trying, and I'm proud of how far we've come. I just wanted you all to know that." The room softened around him. Samantha pressed a hand to her heart, visibly relieved. The tension she had carried for years eased just a little. She could finally see the man she believed he could be. Jenna leaned forward, eyes bright. "Dad," she said warmly, that's the kind of emotional maturity I always hoped you'd find." She smiled, not patronizing but proud. "Keep going. Change doesn't happen in one moment, but you're on the right path." After the dishes were cleared and people drifted into smaller conversations, Paul found himself alone with Emily on the back porch. The evening air was cool, the sky streaked with soft orange and fading gold. They sat side by side in two old chairs, not facing each other, but angled just close enough. Emily broke the silence first. "I'm proud of you, you know that, right?" Paul turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes with a sincerity that held no fear. "I'm getting there," he said quietly. "But hearing you say that, it means more than you know." A gentle quiet settled over them, not the tense silence of the past, but a full, peaceful one. No walls, no defenses, just a father and daughter finally understanding each other. And for the first time in their lives, that connection felt whole. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that felt ordinary until it was. Paul had woken with a heavy tightness in his chest, at first just discomfort, then a dull, pulsing pain that spread down his arm and up into his jaw. He tried to brush it off as stress, as exhaustion, as anything other than what it truly was. But when the room spun and his legs buckled beneath him, denial was no longer an option. The paramedics told him it was a cardiac episode, mild but serious enough to demand immediate attention. As they loaded him into the ambulance, fear wrapped around him in a way he hadn't felt since he was a young man. Fear not just of dying, but of the one thing he'd avoided his entire life: needing someone, depending on someone, being vulnerable. At the hospital, the monitors beeped steadily beside him as he lay in the sterile room, staring at the ceiling tiles. He felt small, fragile, exposed. His first instinct, an instinct carved into him by decades of emotional isolation, was to handle it alone. Keep quiet. Don't alarm anyone. Don't be a burden. But those old habits cracked under the weight of reality. For the first time, he didn't have the strength to hide. The nurse asked who she should call. Paul hesitated only a moment before whispering, "My daughter, Emily." When Emily arrived, she burst through the hospital room door with fear written across her face, her bag still slung over her shoulder as if she hadn't even stopped moving since she got the call. "Dad," she breathed, rushing to his bedside. "What happened? Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well?" He tried to muster a reassuring smile, but it faltered. "I didn't want to worry you." She shook her head sharply, tears welling. "You don't get to do that anymore. Not after everything we've been through. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her voice cracked slightly, and something inside Paul shifted, something long locked away and reinforced by years of pride. For the first time, he didn't fight the softness in her eyes. He didn't retreat into silence. He reached for her hand, gripping it with trembling fingers. "Emily," his voice was barely there, shaky and raw. "I'm scared." She swallowed hard, squeezing his hand. "I know, and you don't have to be scared alone." He took a shaky breath, and with it came a flood of emotions he had kept buried for decades. "I thought if I stayed strong, if I held everything in, that I'd protect the people I love. But all I did was push you away. And now when I need you," his voice broke, "I don't know how to let anyone in." Emily felt her heart break, not from hurt but from understanding, real, deep understanding. She sat down beside him, her voice gentle but unwavering. "You let me in right now. That's enough." And with that, something inside Paul finally gave way. The tears came fast, startling him with their force. Years of restrained emotion, pain, regret, fear, longing poured out of him like a dam finally breaking. His shoulders shook, his breath hitched, and he covered his face as if ashamed of the vulnerability he could no longer contain. Emily didn't flinch, she didn't pull away. She wrapped both hands around his, grounding him through the storm. "Dad," she whispered, "you don't have to hide from me anymore, not now, not ever." It wasn't long before Corinne, Jenna, and Sam arrived, filling the small hospital room with a quiet, steady warmth. Corinne touched Paul's shoulder gently, her expression soft and reflective. Jenna sat at the foot of the bed, eyes full of worry but also pride. Even Sam, usually so composed, looked shaken as he offered a comforting nod. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Paul felt surrounded by a family united not by obligation but by genuine care. They weren't fractured lines anymore. They were a circle, a support system, a home. As the doctor explained his condition and the treatment plan, Paul squeezed Emily's hand again. Not out of fear this time, but out of gratitude. Later, when the room had quieted and the family stepped out to give them a moment, Paul turned to Emily with a look she had never seen on his face before. Something open, unguarded, honest. "I can't keep pushing people away," he said quietly. "I see that now. I don't want to live behind walls anymore. Not with you, not with anyone." Emily felt her breath tremble, but she nodded, eyes glistening. "Then don't," she whispered. "We're here, we're with you, but you have to let us be." He reached out, brushing her cheek with a shaky thumb. "I promise you, Emily, I'm done letting pride decide my life." And for the first time, she believed him completely. As he drifted into a light, exhausted sleep, Emily stayed by his bedside, her hand still wrapped around his. They had been through anger, distance, apologies, setbacks, but this moment, raw and unfiltered, finally brought them to the same place, the same understanding. Both father and daughter now fully saw each other's pain. And for the first time, they were ready to face the future together. The first dinner after Paul's health scare felt different from any family gathering they'd had in years. Not forced, not tense, not filled with the quiet, careful movements of people trying not to trigger each other. There was an ease in the air, a softness that spread through the living room and into the kitchen as Corinne put dishes on the table. Jenna lit candles she claimed were for ambience, and Emily arranged the silverware with a quiet smile tugging at her lips. Paul watched all of it from his seat at the end of the table, a blanket folded over his lap even though he didn't really need it. The doctor had cleared him, telling him he was recovering well, but his family still insisted he take it easy. For once, he didn't argue. Tonight wasn't about pride. It was about being present, truly present, in a way he hadn't been for most of his adult life. When everyone finally sat down, the conversation flowed easily, bubbling with laughter and overlapping stories. Jenna teased Emily about her chaotic cooking skills. Emily protested dramatically. Corinne laughed so hard she had to set her fork down, and even Sam, usually the mild, observant one, jumped in with a story that had everyone cracking up. The table felt alive again. Paul looked around at their faces, the people he had nearly pushed away for good, and a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the food. For years, he had feared moments like this, moments where emotions were close enough to touch. He had avoided them, built walls around them, convinced himself he didn't need them. He knew now he had been wrong. As the laughter continued around him, Paul let his hand rest on the table, lightly touching the rim of his glass. He took a breath, slow and steady, feeling the gravity of everything he had gone through, every emotional barrier he had cracked open, every difficult conversation he had walked into willingly, every moment of vulnerability he had allowed himself to feel. Opening up emotionally, he realized, had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than losing his job, harder than rebuilding his life alone, harder than facing a heart episode that forced him to confront his own fragility. But it was also the most rewarding. It was the first time in decades that he felt not just alive but connected. Across the table, Emily glanced at him and caught the look in his eyes. Something in her softened, something long tensed finally releasing. For the first time in her life, she wasn't studying her father's expressions for signs of distance. For the first time, she knew, deep in her chest, he was here with them, with her. She no longer carried the weight of being the family's emotional anchor. She no longer felt responsible for fixing what he kept breaking. His transformation didn't erase the past, but it healed something essential inside her. She had space to breathe again, to simply be his daughter. Samantha, sitting beside Paul, observed the room with a quiet, almost tender relief. She'd spent years watching the Thompson family drift apart, praying each of them would find the courage to reach for each other again. Tonight, watching Emily lean against her chair in comfort, seeing Paul laugh without hesitation, noticing Jenna's joy and Corinne's peace, she felt gratitude swell inside her. Healing had seemed impossible once. Now it felt tangible. The dinner stretched long into the evening. The candles burned low, plates emptied, voices softened to gentle hums of conversation. And when they finally began clearing the table, there was no tension lingering in the air, no hidden resentment, no unspoken frustration. Just family. As they gathered in the living room with warm cups of tea, Paul cleared his throat lightly. Everyone turned to look at him, not with fear of what he might say, but with genuine openness. "I want to say something," he began, voice steady but touched with emotion. "These last few months, they've been hard for all of us. I know I wasn't easy to love. I know I made things difficult, but I'm done hiding. I'm done shutting down." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'll keep working on myself. I'll keep trying to show up, not just for Emily, but for all of you." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes shining. Corinne nodded gently. Jenna smiled with warmth. Sam placed a reassuring hand on Emily's back. Paul exhaled, the weight he once carried now lighter, shared among the people who had always wanted to help him carry it. The night ended with coats being zipped, warm hugs exchanged, and promises to meet again soon. But when they stepped outside onto the quiet street, no one rushed to their cars. Instead, the whole family stood there, shoulder to shoulder, walking slowly down the sidewalk together. Emily slipped her arm through Paul's. He didn't pull away. He held on firm, steady, warm. The streetlights stretched ahead of them, casting soft glows against the pavement. Their future wasn't perfect. It wasn't guaranteed to be free of struggle. But it was theirs, rebuilt on love, understanding, and connection. A family reborn. And together, they knew they could face whatever came next. The following weekend, Paul did something he had never done before, not in this lifetime and not with this level of intention. He invited everyone over: Emily, Jenna, Corinne, Sam, even a couple of close family friends. He didn't ask out of obligation or routine. He asked because he wanted them close. He wanted to celebrate the fragile, beautiful thing they had rebuilt together. As people arrived one by one, the house buzzed with a warmth that felt unfamiliar but deeply welcome. Jenna brought flowers she claimed were from a discount bin, though they looked expensive. Corinne arrived with her homemade lasagna, the dish she always made when family mattered most. Emily and Sam entered last, carrying dessert and a bottle of sparkling cider Emily insisted was for tradition, even though the tradition was brand new. Paul watched them gather from the kitchen doorway, his hands resting on the counter, his chest swelling with something he couldn't have named a year ago. Pride, gratitude, relief, maybe all of it. The sounds of laughter, the crossing of voices, the casual ease filling every pocket of the space. It felt like a second chance he never thought he'd get. He stepped into the living room, leaned against the wall, and let himself take it in. This was what he had missed most deep down, the feeling of belonging without needing to earn it through silence or distance. The knowledge that his presence alone was enough, that he didn't have to be perfect to be loved. His reflection deepened as he moved to the dining table where everyone was helping set out food. He caught a glimpse of his own smile in the window's reflection, small, genuine, a little worn but real. He realized then how far he had come. The past was still part of him and always would be. But the future felt open now, roomy and possible in ways he had never allowed himself to imagine. He was finally emotionally available, not pretending, not forcing, but naturally stepping forward into connection. Emily noticed him standing there and approached with a soft, knowing expression. She didn't say anything at first, she just stood by him, shoulder brushing his. It struck Paul how different she looked compared to months before, her posture lighter, her eyes gentler. The tension she once carried like armor now softened into something quieter, understanding. She glanced up at him, her voice low but warm. "You look happy." Paul huffed a small laugh. "I guess I am." Emily nodded, smiling. "You deserve it." There was no resentment in her tone, no lingering bitterness. She wasn't waiting for him to slip. She wasn't keeping score. She was present with him, not despite the past, but beyond it. And that shift, her growth, left Paul humbled. Nearby, Samantha watched them with the softest expression Paul had ever seen on her face. She stood leaning against the archway, arms folded loosely, a quiet smile lifting her lips. She didn't interrupt, didn't chime in. She just watched the scene unfold with a hope she had nurtured silently for years. To her, this wasn't just healing. It was a miracle she had once been afraid to wish for. Jenna eventually came over and wrapped an arm around both Paul and Emily, pulling them close with a grin. "Look at you two," she teased lightly. "I swear, if this keeps up, I might retire from my job as family mediator." Emily snorted a laugh and Paul chuckled. But beneath Jenna's joking tone was genuine pride. She looked her father in the eye, her voice softening. "I'm really proud of you, both of you. Just keep at it. This takes work and you're doing it." Paul nodded, the praise hitting him harder than she knew. "We will." As the evening settled in, the family gathered in the living room with plates of food balanced on their laps. Conversations overlapped and circled, stories from years past, gentle teasing, shared memories that had once been too painful to revisit. Now they were reminders of how far they'd come. Later, Paul and Emily found themselves standing alone near the back porch door, plates empty, drinks in hand. The air outside was cool, the night sky glittering faintly through the window. They talked, not about the past, not about things gone wrong, but about the future. About holidays they could spend together. About projects Paul wanted to help with at Emily's place. About a family vacation Jenna was already campaigning for. There was no fear in their voices, no tension, just an ease that came from two people finally seeing each other clearly. At one point Paul said quietly, "I know the road wasn't easy." Emily looked at him, her smile soft. "No, but we made it here." He felt something settle inside him, something like peace. As the evening drew to a close, the Thompson family didn't feel like scattered pieces anymore. They felt like a unit again, a team built on honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to try even when it hurt. The new bonds weren't perfect, but they were real, and for the first time in a long time they were enough. A few months passed with a steady rhythm of family dinners, Sunday calls, and the quiet comfort of a bond finally healed. Life felt different now, warmer, fuller, steadier. But life had a way of testing even the strongest repairs. And the next test came quietly, knocking on Paul's door in the form of a notice from his company. They were downsizing again. And this time, Paul's position wasn't just at risk, it was squarely on the list. He stared at the letter longer than he should have, feeling his stomach tighten. The old instinct rose instantly: retreat, silence, deal with it alone. But when he opened his mouth to swallow the panic, nothing happened. He didn't feel the usual coldness in his chest that pushed him into hiding. Instead, he felt tired. Tired of carrying things alone. Tired of pretending he could weather every storm without leaning on anyone. That night, instead of shutting down, Paul drove straight to Emily's apartment. She opened the door, startled by the look on his face. Not angry, not distant, just shaken. "Dad, what happened?" He handed her the letter with trembling fingers. She read it carefully, her eyes widening, and then looked back up at him. "You're losing your job." "Most likely," he said, voice low. "And he stopped, struggling. "I didn't want to fall apart alone again. I thought you should know." Emily's heart clenched at his honesty. For so long she had begged for this, for openness, for trust, and now he was offering it freely, even though it scared him. She stepped back and motioned him inside. "Okay," she said gently. "Let's sit down and figure this out." But before they could even talk solutions, the emotion hit him. Raw, unfiltered fear. He sank onto her couch, elbows on his knees. "I feel like I'm failing," he admitted. "Like I'll never be able to stand on my own 2 feet again. I don't want to be a burden, not after everything we fixed." Emily sat beside him, placing a hand over his. "You're not a burden, not now, not ever. We've come too far for pride to take over again." He met her eyes, and the vulnerability there was unlike anything he had shown before. His voice cracked. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I don't know if I'm enough." Emily squeezed his hand harder. "You are enough. Your job doesn't define your worth to us. You've done the work, you've changed, you've shown up. That means more than any paycheck ever will." Her words broke him open in the gentlest way. He felt tears prick his eyes but didn't push them away. He let them fall, something the old version of himself would never have done. Samantha arrived 20 minutes later, breathless after Emily called her. She took one look at Paul, his slumped posture, the emotion still settling in his eyes, and immediately sat beside him. "We're here," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "All of us. You're not going through this alone." Jenna and Sam came soon after, the small living room filled with quiet concern, supportive voices, and the warmth of family. Jenna knelt in front of him and took his hands. "Dad," she said softly, "we don't care about the job. We care about you. That's what matters." Sam added, "You've always been the one carrying everything. Let us carry you for a change." A shuddering breath left Paul's lungs. He'd never felt this kind of support before, not even when he was younger, not even when Corinne still lived with him. For once in his life, he didn't push help away. He didn't insist he could handle it. He accepted it, fully, completely. And in that acceptance, something inside him felt stronger, not weaker. Over the next week, Emily sat down with him and laid out options. They looked at his resume, updated his skills, researched local opportunities. Paul listened, took notes, asked questions. It wasn't easy. Every suggestion reminded him of old insecurities, but he didn't retreat this time. He pushed forward, with her. Together, by the end of the week, he had 3 applications sent out, a list of leads, and a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. A fragile but powerful determination replaced the fear. He wasn't helpless, and he wasn't alone. One night after they finished a long session of job searching, the whole family gathered in Emily's living room, pizza boxes on the table, soft music playing, the atmosphere warm. They didn't say anything profound. They didn't need to. The Tojdern. SS itself spoke volumes. Paul looked around at all of them, Emily leaning on Sam's shoulder, Jenna curled on the floor with a blanket, Samantha sipping tea by the lamp, and felt a quiet, sustaining strength fill him. "This," he finally said, voice low but clear, "is what I was missing all those years." He exhaled slowly. "And I'm not letting it go again." Emily smiled, her eyes soft. "Good, because whatever happens next, we'll face it together." The room settled into a peaceful silence, not empty, not awkward, but full of shared understanding. The world outside was still uncertain, the job situation unresolved, the future unclear. But for the first time in his life, Paul didn't fear it. He had his family. He had their trust. And now he finally trusted them too. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it side by side. It started subtly, little waves of fatigue, a tightness in Paul's chest he tried to ignore, a strange weakness in his legs that made him slow down on stairs. He told himself it was stress from the job search or age or just a bad week. But by the third morning, when he collapsed against the kitchen counter, breath shallow and vision blurring, denial was no longer possible. Emily found him slumped on the floor when she stopped by unexpectedly with groceries. Her scream, sharp, terrified, echoed off the cabinets. The paramedics arrived within minutes, lifting him gently while Emily followed with trembling hands pressed against her mouth, trying not to fall apart. At the hospital, as machines beeped in a steady, unsettling rhythm, Paul felt a familiar dread crawl up his spine. Not just fear of pain, not just fear of dying. It was the old terror, the crippling thought that he was once again becoming a burden. That this, the vulnerability he had fought all his life, would now push the people he loved away. He remembered the words his daughter had thrown at him months before, "Your place is in the trash," and for a brief, painful moment he wondered whether this was exactly what he'd feared. Weakness, uselessness, dependence. But then he saw her. Emily sat beside his bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes red but fierce with determination. She leaned forward the moment he stirred. "Dad, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her voice cracked on the last word. Paul tried to speak, but his throat tightened. "You don't have to stay. I don't want to." "No," she said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "You don't get to push me away, not anymore." Every hour of that first night, Emily stayed. She fetched nurses, talked to doctors, brushed his hair back when he drifted in and out of sleep. She held his hand every time his breath hitched or monitors beeped too loudly. And though she was terrified, more terrified than she'd ever been, she refused to leave. Later that evening, Corinne arrived with quiet footsteps and tired eyes. She lingered near the doorway at first, hesitant as if unsure she had the right to be there. But when Emily looked up and whispered, "Mom, he needs us," the barrier between them dissolved. Corinne approached, taking in the sight of her ex-husband so frail and vulnerable. She placed a hand on his blanket-covered foot, her voice soft. "You gave us a scare, Paul." He opened his eyes slowly. "Didn't mean to." Corinne's smile was gentle, sad. "I know." When Emily stepped out briefly to grab coffee, Corinne remained by the bedside, her expression thoughtful. She watched the slow, steady rise of Paul's chest and whispered something that surprised even her. "Thank you, Emily," she said, almost to herself, "for giving your father another chance. I wasn't sure he'd ever get one." Emily paused in the doorway, hearing it, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. She said nothing, just nodded. As the days passed and Paul stabilized, a quiet shift began inside him. Something deeper than before. Something grounded not in fear but in understanding. One afternoon, while Emily sat beside him reading, he cleared his throat. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think needing people was dangerous, like it made me weak, like I was handing over pieces of myself." Emily closed her book and looked at him. "And now?" He exhaled slowly, the weight of years lifting as he spoke. "Now I see that needing people doesn't make you weak. It makes you connected. And that connection, that's where the strength actually is." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek before she could stop it, but she didn't look away. "I'm glad you see that, Dad." He reached for her hand, not hesitantly this time, but confidently. "I wasted too many years hiding. I don't want to do that anymore, not with you, not with this family." She squeezed his fingers. "Then don't, we're here, all of us." That night, with his family gathered around, Jenna laughing softly at his hospital-issued socks, Sam adjusting pillows without being asked, Corinne humbly offering her support, a clarity settled into Paul's chest as naturally as breath. This was his family, imperfect, hurt, he ailed, healing still, but present, loving his. And he belonged with them, not in the trash, not on the sidelines, not behind a wall of pride and fear, but right here, at the center of their imperfect, beautiful circle. When the doctor finally told him he was improving and might be discharged soon, Paul took Emily's hand again and said, "I'll always be here for you, no matter what comes next, I promise." Emily's eyes softened, shining with an emotion far different from the resentment she once carried. "And I'll be here for you, always." As Paul lay back, feeling stronger than he had in months, not physically, but emotionally, he realized he'd undergone a transformation deeper than he ever expected. The man who once hid from connection now craved it. The man who feared being a burden now understood he was loved. It felt like rebirth, not of his body but of his spirit. Paul Thompson finally knew where he belonged. Not in the trash, but in the hearts of those who loved him. The house felt different that evening, not because of decorations or music or the spread of food laid out across the kitchen counter, but because of something softer, something earned. Months had passed since Paul's health scare, and in that time the Thompson family had not only healed, they had grown into something new, something stronger, something whole. They gathered for a celebration Jenna insisted on calling the New Beginning dinner, even though no one quite knew what they were celebrating. Maybe survival, maybe connection, maybe the simple miracle of all being in the same room without fear or resentment hovering overhead. Whatever it was, the air buzzed with warmth that none of them had felt in years. Paul stood near the living room window for a moment, watching Emily and Jenna arrange plates while Sam teased them about turning a simple dinner into a state event. Corinne laughed from the couch. sipping tea and shaking her head as if amused by a memory only she knew. The hum of their voices wrapped around Paul like a blanket. He had to inhale deeply, steadying himself against the surge of emotion. Not sadness, no, that was long past him now. This was gratitude. This was pride. This was the quiet realization that he had made it through a storm he once thought would swallow him whole. As he stepped into the dining room, he let his hand glide across the back of a chair, grounding himself. He remembered the early days, the anger, the coldness, the distance he had created brick by brick, thinking it would keep him safe. Instead, it had suffocated him. But looking at his family now, laughing and moving in perfect, unspoken sync, he felt something he had once believed he didn't deserve: belonging. Dinner began with clatter and chatter, everyone talking over each other, passing dishes, sharing small stories. Emily kept glancing at her father, not in fear of what he would say, not bracing for disappointment, but with the tenderness of someone who finally sees not just the man he is, but the man he's become. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and looked toward him with a steady, open expression. "Dad," she began, not loudly, but loud enough for the table to quiet. I want to say something." Paul straightened, heart thumping gently. Emily breathed in, collecting her thoughts. "A year ago, we were in a place I didn't think we'd ever come back from. I was angry, hurt, and you were closed off, but you showed up. You changed. You opened your heart in ways I never thought I'd see." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "And I want to thank you for giving me the father-daughter relationship I always wished for." The room softened instantly. Paul felt the words settle deep inside him, healing places he hadn't even realized were still wounded. He swallowed hard. "Emily," he said quietly, "you gave me the chance to try. I'll always be grateful for that." Samantha leaned forward, wiping a tear she tried to hide. "You two have no idea how incredible it is to see this," she said with a small, heartfelt smile. "The work you've both done, it's built something new for all of us. A foundation we can actually trust." Jenna nodded vigorously, her grin wide. "Seriously, I never thought I'd see a day where we all sit together without tension simmering in the room. It feels good, like we finally get to be a real family." Paul let the joy of their words wash over him. He'd spent years believing he was the weak link, the fractured piece that kept them from fitting together. But tonight, he saw clearly. The healing they'd done wasn't just his. It belonged to all of them. As dinner wound down, the conversation mellowed into a gentle hum. Stories turned softer, laughter quieter. Even silence felt like peace, comfortable, warm, earned. They lingered long after the plates were empty, no one eager to break the spell of togetherness. Eventually, the night drew to a close. Coats were pulled from hooks, leftovers were packed, hugs were exchanged, longer her hugs than before. Emily slipped her hand into Paul's as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, lit by soft pools of lamplight. They walked slowly, side by side, neither feeling the need to fill the air with words. After a while, Paul broke the silence, his voice low but sure. "Emily, I'll always be here for you, no matter what. That's a promise I intend to keep." She looked up at him, her expression full of warmth that reached all the way into her eyes. "And I'll always be here for you, Dad, always." They kept walking, steps in sync, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. The future, as always, was uncertain. But for the first time in their lives, uncertainty didn't frighten either of them. Because whatever came next, they would face it together.